Charlie Bolden is a Marine, a retired Major General Marine, current administrator of NASA. He was a test pilot, Marine aviator, flew over 100 missions in Vietnam as an attack pilot, became a test pilot at PAX, went on to become a shuttle astronaut. He commanded 2 of his 4 shuttle missions, one of them releasing the incredible Hubble telescope into space. After his long career with NASA, he went back to the Marine Corps, back to the Corps, and 2 of his jobs were in command positions, one of the 1st Marine Expeditionary Force. He was also commanding general of the 3rd Marine Aircraft Wing at Miramar, General Charlie Bolden. James Lovell, Naval Aviator, a retired Navy captain. His first jet was the Banshee. It was one of the Navy's very first combat jets. Back in the 50s, became a test pilot, spent 4 years as program director on the F-4H Phantom jet as a test pilot before he went to the astronaut corps. He is the only astronaut from Gemini and Apollo to fly 4 missions, 2 in Gemini, 2 in Apollo. And he was, of course, commander of Apollo 13, Captain Jim Lovell. Our country's been the leader in space for some 50 years. And in a few minutes, we're going to talk about the next couple of decades. Of course, that's right in General Bolden's territory. But before we do that, I think it's useful because most of you were either really young or were not born when the space program really got started back in the early 1960s. We are used now, of course, to having thousands of satellites whiz around the planet. There are some more than 13,000 of them up there now. Only about a quarter of them are still working. The rest are now space junk. But over 3,500 of them are functioning properly. They're in their proper orbits. And as you all know, we could not depend on them any second of any day in our lives without those satellites doing what they do. Well, back in the late 1950s, there was no such thing as a man-made satellite. And it was not the United States, but it was the Soviet Union that put the first one up there. It was 1957. They called it Sputnik. It weighed 184 pounds. It did nothing but go around the planet and beep. But the fact was, it was up there, and they got there first. They put a couple of more Sputniks up, and then in 1961, in April, they orbited the first man, Yuri Gagarin, around the planet. The Russians beat us into space. Well, 4 months after he was inaugurated as President of the United States, John F. Kennedy spoke to Congress and the people of our country and challenged us and said, our goal in this decade is to put a man on the moon and return him safely to Earth. In this decade, it was the most remarkable technical challenge ever in the history of the country to think we could do that in a short window of 8.5 years, only from scratch. But of course, that is what happened. The program, as briefly as I can, had 3 parts to it. First, there was Mercury. It was a one-man capsule. There were 6 flights. Alan Shepard, we just heard, was the first, he was a naval aviator. He was the first American in space. John Glenn, Marine aviator, first American to orbit the planet. That was Mercury. To build on Mercury, went to Gemini. Those were 2-man capsules. There were 10 flights, and each flight built on the last. Techniques, software, hardware, procedures, learning to do the things that had to be done if we were going to go to the moon. Captain Lovell flew 2 of those missions. On to Apollo. There were 11 Apollo missions, 3 men in the capsule. There were 6 of those missions landed on the moon. 12 Americans walked on the moon, and that all happened to meet the challenge that President Kennedy made back in 1961. You know that from there, we went on to Skylab. That was a less ambitious project. It was scientific to see how we could live in space. And then, ironically, there was a program with the Russians called Apollo-Soyuz, and then we went on, of course, to the Space Shuttle. 135 missions of the shuttle, and followed, of course, by, which is now complete, and now the International Space Station, which is up there, as you all know, whizzing around right now. There, in a nutshell, is 50 years of America in space. And these three people, if you look at them, realizing that Captain Lovell was in the initial vetting process for the first Mercury astronauts, and the fact that Major General Bolden is now the administrator of NASA, these three people literally reflect the entire history personally of the American space program. As I look out, Captain Lawrence, as I look out at all the midshipmen and realize that all of you went to the Academy, you all graduated from the Academy, and as I look at you, I'm trying to imagine slightly younger images of the three of you and put you out there in the audience and ask you, when you were here in their position, what were your thoughts, what were your dreams, what were your goals, what did you think your opportunities might be as a freshman here at the Academy?
Well, you're very kind to say slightly younger, much younger. Actually, I want to start before that, because my association with the Naval Academy and my association with the space program started long before I was born. My mother's father is a graduate of this fine institution, as is my father. And my father actually was involved in the selection process for the original group of Mercury astronauts and made it down to the final cut. And then he was disqualified with a medical problem. But when my father finished flight training and got his wings, his first squadron was out on, in the San Francisco Bay Area, and he flew with somebody named Alan Shepard. And then he went to the Patuxent River to be a test pilot, and down the street from where my family lived John Glenn and his kids. So my older brother and sister played with the Glenn kids. And so when those first gentlemen went up into space, obviously we paid attention in my household, but it was really the exploits of Captain Lovell and his fellow Apollo astronauts that caught my attention. And I want to recognize another astronaut in the audience, and I know I'm stealing your thunder a little bit, General Bolden, but talking about Naval Academy Association's Mr. Kirby, please stand up. Now, the news will like this, because I call him Mr. Kirby, because Captain Kirby, United States Navy retired, a fine naval flight officer, used to do chow calls outside of my door when I was a first class. So it was wonderful to welcome him to the astronaut corps. But Bob and myself are of the generation that got to watch the Apollo program. And it absolutely captured our imagination, and it determined the direction of our lives. I was 10 years old at the time. You all can do the math and now figure out how old I am. But I was riveted in front of that black and white television to watch Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin walk on the moon for the first time. And as a 10-year-old, I said to myself, that's it. That's what I want to do when I grow up. I want to be an astronaut. I want to fly in space. So knowing my father had gone through a selection process, I turned to him and he gave me some very wise advice. He said, take a look at what the first few groups of astronauts had done and followed in their footsteps. Most of them, at that point in time, had gone to a service academy and become aviators. And growing up in a Navy family, well, it was easy to follow family tradition and come to the Naval Academy. So that brings me to the point when I was here as a midshipman. And honestly, I came here knowing that was my dream. My father's also wise advice was to go into engineering. And I'm going to recognize another individual in the audience. Professor Johnson, please stand up. He taught me. It's wonderful to see you here. I studied ocean engineering because my first studies convinced me I wasn't smart enough to go into aeronautical engineering. And Professor Johnson was one of my great instructors. But I came here with that dream, and through 4 years of very hard work, rigorous academic program, great professional training, a lot of great opportunities through the summer training, I graduated from here realizing that thanks to the tools that the Navy was going to give me and the Naval Academy had already given me, I could fulfill that dream. And you heard the fact that I got to go to MIT to get a master's degree. I owe that to that opportunity to Secretary John Lehman, who, if you get to stay for lunch, you'll hear. He started a program at MIT to allow naval officers to go there to get a master's degree in ocean engineering or oceanography. And the Navy asked me, since I studied in ocean engineering, if I'd like to go to MIT to get a master's degree. And he said as long as I got accepted, they would pay. So I jumped on that opportunity. So I owe an incredible amount to both the Naval Academy and the Navy as well. For the midst of I want you to hear this. This is not an easy place to be at. It is a great place to be from. At times it is not easy to serve your country in either the Navy or the Marine Corps, but trust me, there are some tremendous opportunities that they will make available to you. And the best advice I can give you is to make sure that you put yourselves in positions where you can take advantage of those opportunities. So try and make decisions in such a way that you will leave those doors open for you so you have a wide array of opportunities available to you as you advance through your career.
Same question. As you think back to your beginnings here.
My answer is real simple. When I sat up there as a plebe, I didn't have a clue. I came here from Columbia, South Carolina. There were two things I knew I was not going to do in my life. One was be a Marine, and the other one was fly airplanes. I came here because I'd seen a program called Men of Annapolis on television. I was fascinated by the uniform, and I was really fascinated by the fact that young women came from all over the country to meet midshipmen, and that's how naive I was. I had no clue what was going to happen. I had no idea what the Navy would bring, since I knew I was going in the Navy. I came here to be a UDT officer, underwater demolitions team officer, and during my time, Admiral Draper Kaufman, who became superintendent while I was here and was the father of UDT, broke the news to me that then you could not go from the Naval Academy into UDT because they grew their own. I was devastated because I had no plans other than that. I was blessed to have had a company officer my plebe year by the name of Major John Riley Love, who that was his 1 year here with me. When it came time to graduate, I looked back on my experience here. I knew I could do anything based on my 4 years here, and I said I want to be like him. So that's how I went to the Marine Corps. At basic school, found out, in spite of the fact that I thought I wanted to be an infantry officer and defy the law of averages for the life expectancy of a second lieutenant in Vietnam. Crawling around in the mud in November and snow, I said, you know, I made a big mistake. It was sort of like plebe summer when you realize that you really don't want to be here. I'll go back to that. I called my dad and my mom every week once we were allowed to call on the phone, and I said, I made a mistake. I know I've told you since 7th grade I want to be here. Wrong place. I do not want to be here. I want to come home. And every week for 52 weeks, my dad would say, hang in there one more week. And I did, and I got through here. And as Wendy says, horrible place to be at. Sometimes it gets better with every year. I think the upperclassmen will tell the plebes that. An incredible place to be from. But I stumbled into Naval Aviation just to get away from the mud. Decided I would go to Pensacola and fell in love with aviation the very first time I lifted off in a T-38, T-34. And I was very fortunate to have instructor pilots, mostly Marines, who talked about being a test pilot. That became my next aspiration. I knew what astronauts did, but I had no idea. I mean, I didn't even think I could ever be an astronaut, so I never dreamed of being one. I think you talk to Beamer, you talk to 50% of the people in the astronaut office today will probably tell you, yeah, I never thought I'd be doing this. Because everybody there, that was not their lifelong dream. I met a guy by the name of Dr. Ron McNair. I call him the late, great Dr. Ron McNair. He became a friend of mine. He was African-American like me. He had grown up in a teeny-weeny little place called Lake City, South Carolina. Selected by NASA in the very first group of shuttle astronauts. PhD out of MIT, one of the world's foremost experts in laser physics. He came to Pax River where I was a test pilot, said, hey, are you thinking about applying for the space shuttle program? I said, not on your life. And he said, why not? I said, they'll never pick me. And he looked at me incredulously and said, you know, that's the dumbest thing I ever heard. He said, how do you know you won't be picked if you don't ask? And so he goaded me into applying for the space program, and I was fortunate enough to be selected and then spent 14 years in the space program. An incredible period of time that I consider part of my 34-year active duty life in the Marine Corps, which was the most incredible experience I've ever had, to be quite honest.
Jim, if he stumbled into aviation, when did the bug bite you?
You know, I guess I'm the old man here. Actually, I was graduated from the high school in 1946, and at that time, a lot of naval aviators were leaving the Navy just after World War II, much more than the Navy anticipated. So there was a great admiral by the name of Holloway. Admiral Holloway started the Holloway program of aviation midshipman. I got into that program, went 2 years at the University of Wisconsin, went down for flight training. But at that time, I also got an appointment to the Academy. And so there was a great consternation by the young Marines that just came back from the war, said, why are you going to go to the Academy? You already have 2 years of college, you're already in Naval Aviation, you've just got it all made. And then the captain of pre-flight school called me in one day and said, son, if you want to make the Navy your career, get up to the Academy. So I did. I came back, repeated, of course, my 2 years that I had at Wisconsin, graduated in '52, went right into Naval Aviation after that. My uncle, by the way, graduated here in 1913 and became the 58th Naval Aviator. And so I learned a lot about Naval Aviation as I was growing up from his talks. And I went into aviation, became a night fighter pilot as a rookie, which was sort of unusual, in a squadron called VC-3 out of Westpac. And I came from there, I came down to Pax River, was in the class 20, did a lot of the initial work on the Phantom, if those of you remember that airplane for times, and then I was down at Oceana instructing in the Phantom. In fact, I had just got the first Marine East Coast Squadron graduated, and then we had the first Navy Phantom Squadron come through. And when I got a second group of astronauts. Now, I have to tell you that in 1958, I was in the Mercury Selection program. That tells you how old I am, you know, with the Shepherds and the Glens. And at that time, the Space Task Group at Langley was thinking about putting a man in space. And they were thinking about building a capsule and putting it on top of one of those Atlas boosters. And I got secret orders along with my contemporaries at that time at Pax River, Pete Conrad and Wally Schwa and Al Shepard. And we went to Washington to get briefed on what they were going to do. And of course, at that time when they said they're going to put a man in a capsule on an Atlas booster, which by the way, they were blowing up every other day down at Cape Canaveral, we thought that'd be a short way to have a Navy career. And should we get sidetracked in some of this government program that we might lose our normal, career abilities to go into the regular in the Navy? And so when it was all said and done, we got together, Shepard, Wally Schwa, Pete Conrad, and I, we talked it all around, and Wally was trying to convince people that this was not the way to go, and yet he was really wanting to go himself. And we all decided that was the way to go. Well, 32 of us went down to Loveless Clinic for our physicals. I was the only guy of the 32 that flunked the physical. And, I was devastated. I came back, and of course, they picked the original 7 out of that. And 2 years later, the Navy, not knowing any better, just called me up again and said, would you still like to apply? And I did apply. I applied for the second group, the Gemini group. I got in that time. The physical was a lot more. What I flunked on was a thing called high bilirubin, something that you normally get taken in your blood due to either hepatitis or malaria or something like that, yellow jaundice. And anyway, I got in the second time around with no strain at all. And around the end of 1966 or 67, I had made 2 flights, Gemini 7 and Gemini 12. Gemini 7, of course, being a 2-week mission. At that time, I had more time in space than anybody in the world. And the doctor who rejected me for my physical at Lovewood's clinic and the first time around came around. Now, every once in a while in a person's life, you can say, I told you so. And when this good old Dr. Switchenberg, retired Air Force doctor, and I said, do you see there, doctor? 715 hours or something like that, I forget what it was. And he said, well, I guess the data was a little bit wrong. But I guess he had to reject somebody.
Talk about Gemini 7, if you would, and Gemini 12. I talked about how each mission built on the last mission to develop procedures and so forth. So what was Gemini 7? Why was it 14 days? And who was in that phone booth with you?
Well, first of all, the Gemini program was an R&D program looking towards going to the moon. After all, President Kennedy had already announced going to the moon in 1961, but we had to do things in Earth orbit first to make sure that we could accomplish those objectives before we would ever go all the way to the moon. Gemini 7 was one of these objectives. First of all, it was a 2-week mission because that was the maximum length of time that we determined to go to the moon and come back again was 2 weeks. There's a lot of medical people who didn't think that the body would stay in a zero gravity environment for 2 weeks. But it turns out that there are no bodily functions that cannot work as well in zero gravity as they work here on Earth, even though that man evolved under Earth's gravity. And the person with me was an Air Force guy by the name of Frank Borman. And one of the things that we did there, oh, by the way, the second major objective was rendezvous. Gemini 6 was supposed to take off first before 7. They had an Agena unmanned vehicle that they're going to rendezvous with. The Agena was lost, and consequently, in the brilliant move of good leadership on the part of NASA management, they said, well, listen, Gemini 7 will be there for 2 weeks. Let's send Gemini 6 up and rendezvous. We'll get that part. We won't get the docking, but we'll get the rendezvous part squared away to make sure that we can do that. And so after Borman and I were up for about 12 days, and we did about 23 medical experiments, Gemini 6 came up, and we saw them coming up out of the darkness, the rendezvous with us, and we stayed together for several hours. And it happened to be during that time of near the Army-Navy football game. Now, in Gemini 7, Colonel Frank Borman, class of 1950, Air Force, now, West Pointer though originally. In Gemini 6, Wally Schraw, Commander Navy, and Tom Stafford, Air Force, but he was a Naval Academy graduate. And so what we did was when we got together, nose to nose, I had the camera, Stafford held the signs that Beat Army, I took the picture, and it's the highest Beat Army rally we've ever had.
Is it possible to describe those 2 weeks with Frank Borman and what the capsule was like when you landed?
Well, I hate to tell you, 3 days after we took off, he lost his toothbrush, and we used the same toothbrush for the ring or two. Actually, the pure oxygen sort of made things a little bit better for a while, but we had 2 weeks worth of food. We had to save all the food. In fact, we had to save everything for 2 weeks. And with the Sierra Club wouldn't let us throw anything over the side at that time. But it was a strange, and I think Borman, when he had between his Apollo 8 and Gemini 7, thought that the Gemini 7 was a much more rigorous flight. As a matter of fact, when we finally got down to the aircraft carrier and he came up and looked at the crew, he said, we just want to announce that we're engaged.
You talked about the rendezvous. The next mission, Neil Armstrong actually did the first docking. And then we get to Gemini 11, and Cernan is the second American to walk in space. It was disastrous out there. It was a horrible experience because so little was known about, quote, walking in space, curious term. But you had Gemini 12 with Buzz. How much more did you learn to get ready to go into Apollo?
Well, 12 was the wrap-up of the R&D to make sure we could get ready to go to the moon. There were certain things that we didn't do yet. One was involved EVA or getting out of the spacecraft and doing things which you see, you know, all the time now in the shuttle, doing everything they're doing outside. But in those early days when people tried to get out and start to do work around the spacecraft, they all forgot Newton's third law of motion. To every action, there's an opposite and equal reaction. And so people were working against themselves, the zero gravity. If they touched the spacecraft, which now was a big mass because the Earth's gravity has been neutralized by the centrifugal force going around the Earth, it became a primary factor, and the spacecraft would repel them. And consequently, on Gemini 12, a brilliant young engineer got an idea about why don't we go and rent a swimming pool and then make a mock-up of the spacecraft, sink it in the pool, and then put Buzz, who was my companion on this flight, who was supposed to get out, in a spacesuit. Spacesuits work just as well underwater as they do in space. Put enough flotation devices, or lead actually, around to make it neutrally buoyant, and told Buzz, do not swim, but just sort of be buoyant and try to work out the handholds and the footholds that we were developing to make sure we could walk or we could work in space. So that's what happened. We rented a boys' pool up in Baltimore. We did that and came out, worked perfectly, and then on the flight, we were able to have Buzz out, I think, 3 times for about 5.5 hours, and he was perfectly normal. Didn't exert himself too much, and we finally saw the last problem that we had to do before we went on to the moon.
The first Apollo flight that was successful was Apollo 7, commanded by Wally Schirra, again, naval aviator. Apollo 8, there are you and your Bill Anders, Frank Borman again, and you're the first human beings to see the back of the moon. How much of that mission was technical challenge? How much of the mission was geopolitical?
Well, there was some of both in that particular mission. This is the epitome of my space flights, as a matter of fact, Apollo 8. The Apollo 8 was going to be an Earth orbital mission. We were going to test the lunar module and the command module, go around the Earth, make sure both of these things function perfectly before we'd ever send any of these spacecraft to the moon. 2 things happened in the summer of 1968 that changed our mission. The first thing is we had intelligence information that the Soviets were going to put a man or men around the moon in the late fall of 1968. As a matter of fact, now we know that was absolutely true, now that we have more information from Russia. The second thing was that in 1968, towards the end of it, Grumman Aircraft, the builders of the lunar module, finally came to us and said, there is no way we're going to get the lunar module ready for a flight in 1968. So consequently, NASA management, in another good instance of leadership, said, look, if Apollo 7 and its 11-day mission around Earth works out fine, and they were just the command service module, no lunar module, but everything worked out fine, if that proves feasible, we will send Apollo 8, without the lunar module, of course, all the way to the moon, and we can then test out the navigation, the communication, and look for suitable landing spots as Apollo 8 goes around the moon. And that's exactly what happened. On December 21st, Frank Borman, Bill Anders, and myself took off to be the first 3 people going to the moon. I was a navigator on that flight. It was kind of an interesting flight, 240,000 miles out. The computer that I was using had 64 kilobits in it. But I have to tell you, it was, in that day, it was really a great little computer. We call it the 4th astronaut, as a matter of fact. And we went around the moon, we got behind the moon and looked for suitable landing spots. And I'll never forget coming around the first time and looking up. And even though the moon was awe-inspiring and sort of forbidden, and nothing but craters and gray mass and things like that, what really inspired me, and I think the greatest impression that I had, was coming out of the lunar horizon was the Earth. And the Earth was the only color you could see. It had blue oceans, and of course the white clouds. It had the tans, the browns, the salmon colors of the deserts. You could not see green because that frequency is absorbed with the atmosphere coming through. Really a beautiful sight. 240,000 miles away. I can put up my thumb. I do this all the time, but it's kind of, you know, it's really, you have to think about it. Putting the Earth behind your thumb. Everything that you've ever known. Your loved ones, the school, your country, all countries, all the problems that they're having at that particular time around your, underneath your thumb, disappeared. It gave me kind of two thoughts. Number one, how insignificant we really all are. That I could put my thumb up and suddenly make everything that I've ever known disappear. And the second thing that I thought about, how, you know, how glad that we are, how fortunate we are that we have what we have here on Earth. The Earth is in reality a spacecraft. Whether you like it or not, you're all astronauts. We have limited supplies, and we have to all learn to live and work together. And that's the thoughts that I had from Apollo 8. It was, by the way, we burned into orbit on Christmas Eve, and so we read the first 10 verses of Genesis from the Old Testament, which was basically the basic of most of our world's religions. And that's what happened.
So that was successful. The next two missions as well, Apollo 9 and 10 were successful. 11, of course, Neil Armstrong, first man to walk on the moon. 12 was successful, so now 4 Americans have walked on the moon. Apollo 13, Captain Lovell was supposed to be the 5th man to walk on the moon, didn't work out. Spacecraft blew up 200,000 miles out. They did get back safely, but as many people have said, that mission was a failure. What, Captain Lovell, does it say to you about leadership and about teamwork that you got back safely to Earth?
Yeah, Apollo 13 was actually a failure in its initial mission, but really a triumph in the ability of people to have good leadership. And I'm speaking of the people that were in the control center who helped us get through. This flight, by the way, was assigned to Al Shepard, 13. He had been grounded for many years, and finally he became ungrounded, and so they gave it to 13. I had 14. And one day, Deke Slayton came to me and said, look, we don't think that Al had enough training after being grounded for so many years. Could you take 13? And I said, yeah, why not? Just 6 months earlier, we'd be fine. I'll take 13. And of course, we took off on April 11th at 13:13 Central Standard Time. Should have known something was going to happen around that time. But the thing that I want to bring up about that flight are the essence of good leadership, number one, but also teamwork, because teamwork is the glue that puts any kind of organization together. And you're all going to experience this thing, the bids here in the audience, when you get aboard ship, how you have to work as a team. And you have to know what everybody else is doing and what's happening. It's very, very important. Initiative was another attribute, another characteristic that you should all have. Because things don't go the way they're planned. You'll see that on your cruises. You'll see that on your various, assignments. You've got to regroup. You've got to change the plan. You've got to determine how to figure out how to get out of crisis. And what do you have to work for? What do you have on board that can do the job and get you a solution? These are the things that I think 13 brought home to a lot of people, not just in the space program or not just into the military, but a lot of people in business and government use snippets of that particular movie, if you saw the movie, to educate their people about things that they have to learn to do.
And moving forward, the rest of the Apollo missions were very successful. Jump 9 years ahead now to the Space Shuttle. Captain Lawrence, what are your most powerful memories of your experiences on the shuttle?
You frequently get that question and you think, how do you condense all that experience into a very short period of time and come up with highlights? But given the nature of this audience, I want to talk about my participation in the Shuttle Mir program, with suddenly having NASA astronauts going over to Star City, Russia, the cosmonaut training facility, to spend several months at a time on board Mir. And for somebody who graduated in 1981, still during the Cold War, who had an opportunity to go out on ships and go up to the North Atlantic and be followed by Soviet naval warships bristling with big guns and be overflown by Soviet aircraft, it was almost hard to wrap my head around the opportunity to go to Russia and suddenly train side by side with people that I had been prepared to go to war against. And it was really a fascinating experience. I think when I reflect on all my time as an astronaut, that, and having an opportunity to be on the first shuttle mission after the Columbia accident and help return the shuttle program to flight, I think probably some of my most significant experiences were the experiences I had over in Russia. Trying to form relationships, friendships, forge a strong bond with, again, people that I have been trained to go to war against. And so it was very interesting to live over in Star City for 16 months. I have some amazing stories to tell about that. When I first went over there, I was actually the Director of Operations for NASA, called Director of Operations Russia, DOR for short. I was there, yeah, everything's an acronym. So I was there for 6 months serving in that capacity, and it was still in the early stages of the Shuttle Mirror program. At that point, we had just launched second astronaut to go on board, Shannon Lucid. And we were still trying to feel one another out, trying to understand each other's cultures, and I thought, it'd be fun to start introducing the Russians to some of the things that we hold dear in America. So I decided to have a 4th of July picnic, thanks to the fact that McDonald's had advertised in one of the English language newspapers that they would basically cater a 4th of July picnic for the expats over there. So I went down to the McDonald's in Moscow and told them who I was and arranged to get all this food, and we picked it up and they provided us with hamburgers and little corn on the cobs and apple pie turnovers. So we invited all the Russians, we invited the cosmonauts, we invited our instructors, come on over to the NASA office and have a 4th of July picnic. And they came, it was a lot of fun. We tried to introduce the Russians to baseball. And between our limited abilities to speak Russian and their limited abilities to speak English, trying to describe the rules of baseball was an absolute disaster. And we could never get the Russians to get a grasp of the game. They loved hitting the ball. They understood they could run from home to first base, and that was about it. So we're like, it works. Another one of the interesting traditions that we tried to introduce them to, thanks to a fellow astronaut, Dave Wolf, was Halloween. So we thought, this will be fun. The Russians need to know about this unique experience we have in the United States, this holiday that we celebrate, Halloween, trick-or-treating, coming in costumes. Well, what makes this story so funny is the fact that in the Russian language, the word costume means business suit. So again, we went around to the cosmonauts and said, hey, we're going to have this party at Dave's apartment, Halloween, you come in costume, because we were speaking to them in English and Russian, and we didn't know. We just assumed costume meant costume, so come in costume. And so the Americans and some of the European astronauts were there. We're all in costumes, very sundry costumes, and the cosmonauts begin to show up, and they are in business attire. But nevertheless, we had a lot of fun. But truly, I think that opportunity to start working side by side with the Russians, to learn their program, to give them an opportunity to learn ours, to share cultures, to form friendships, by far is probably one of the most significant things that I got to do as an astronaut. And really that program, it was designed as a precursor for the International Space Station. I think Charlie would agree with me, in that capacity, it really did a tremendous job. And it truly laid the foundation for the success that we've had in the International Space Station program.
General Bolden, 135 missions of the shuttle. To what extent did the shuttle live up to its hopes and expectations?
To some, shuttle was a dismal failure, and you've read about it in the papers and everything, because it had this promise of bringing low-cost, routine access to space. That was a result of marketing You know, you had to sell it to the president, national command authority, and so people led President Nixon to believe that we were going to fly 50 flights a year and it was going to be really cheap. Space flight is not cheap, never will be, never has been, and so you know, as we move into the commercial era for access to low Earth orbit the way we're trying to do now, I always try to caution people, it is going to be better than having NASA own and try to operate the space shuttle, but don't be fooled into thinking that it's going to be like going to buy a ticket, you know, on Continental Airlines and go from DC to San Diego. Not the case. Space flight is dangerous, expensive, very demanding. Normal people can and should do it. You know, I'll go back to Jim's comment about looking at Earth, sticking your thumb up there. You know, from low Earth orbit, the space shuttle, you don't have that experience, but you put your thumb up in front of your eyes, and our atmosphere goes away. I mean, there is none. It's this thin blue line circling our Earth, and I was intrigued to find Jim used the term insignificant. People ask about spaceflight, and I always tell them, you know, spiritually I wasn't changed because I grew up in a religious family, but my perspective of life here on Earth and my perspective as a human being was radically changed because I realized how insignificant I was. You know, you look down on Earth, and man, you can see long linear features. You can see roads, bridges, runways. You don't see buildings. You know, unless you use a set of binoculars or put a big lens on a camera, you see these gray blobs that are cities, but if you were in a spaceship coming from Mars, and you got that low, I mean, you got down to 250 miles from the surface, I still think they would say, we know something's going on down there because of these lines and stuff, but it doesn't look like there's any people down there. So you do feel insignificant, but Wendy pointed out that what was most significant to her, what's most memorable, was her experience in Russia. For me, every single flight was different. Every single flight was incredibly inspirational and motivating. My most interesting experience in my 14 years was the last two in the astronaut office, when I was privileged to fly as a commander of STS-60, which was the first joint Russian-American shuttle mission, where I had as a crew member Vladimir Konstantinovich Krikalev. At the time that Sergei, but at the time that Sergei and who eventually ended up being his backup, Vladimir Titov, came to train with us and bring their families from Russia. I mean, they brought their families to Houston, Texas. I can only imagine what that must have been like. First of all, coming to Texas. You know, if you're going to send somebody to the United States to get a flavor, I'm not sure that Texas is the first place to send them. And I say that as a Texan. But they came, and Vladimir spoke no English, zero, nada. So he trained with us for a year with an interpreter trying to learn the language. Sergei, on the other hand, was a young, incredible engineer, fluent in English. At the time that we flew, he was like Jim. At the time that he came to fly with us, he was the most experienced human in space. He had lived in space for 15 months. His first flight was 4 months on Mir. His second flight, which was supposed to be a flight of 4 months on Mir, turned into 10 months because the Soviet Union disintegrated. He left Earth as a citizen of the Soviet Union. His birthplace was Leningrad. When he came back to Earth 10 months later, there was no Soviet Union. His country was Russia. His capital, his place of birth was now back to being called St. Petersburg, his original name. I mean, just incredible. He was unbelievable as a crew member. I learned about the difference in approach to things. They're very practical. You know, we're very procedural. You got to do this. Everything's laid out, and you do not stray from the rules. Something goes wrong, you call the ground. Because in the American space program, we had the tracking and data relay satellite. We were out of touch with the ground maybe 2 minutes on an orbit. In the Russian space program, even today, they're in touch with the ground for maybe 10 minutes per orbit. So they are very autonomous. When they rendezvous and dock, the Progress, Soyuz, they do it autonomously. There's nobody flying the vehicle to dock with the International Space Station. We don't do anything autonomously when it comes to being in close. We're all Navy pilots, and we want to be in control. And when we're going aboard ship, I don't care how good the computer flies, how well the computer flies it, I want to catch the 3-wire. That's just our mentality. It's going away, to be quite honest, which is, I mean, that's a fact of life, but that's the way America does stuff. So my experience, my family's experience in those 2 years of training with and getting to make lifelong friends with Sergei and Vladimir and their families was absolutely incredible. And I will segue to the future, to be quite honest, because they are our partners. They're incredible partners, but they're not the only partner we have. We're in partnership with a 5-member consortium on the International Space Station. A lot of people like to say the U.S. is in charge. We are, because when I go to a heads of agency meeting, I'm the senior official there. You know, the United States is the dominant member, but we are not the only member. We're a member of a consortium that owns the International Space Station. And so I don't make decisions. President Obama doesn't make decisions unilaterally. We have to go out and we have to get agreement among the partnership. And we have been able to do that for more than 10 years now. It's been absolutely incredible. And that's, you know, we're going to continue to do that. But we're going to explore. We're finally going to leave, Jim and I'll talk about this. Humans are finally going to leave the confines of this planet, low Earth orbit, and go somewhere else based on what we decided this past week.
You made significant announcements.
Absolutely incredible.
Right,
Yeah.
significant announcements.
Yeah.
You made significant announcements this week about where the plans are now to go in space. If you can, give us a
very, very quickly, because it's been a
sketch of
struggle. It has been. I've been the NASA administrator for 2 years. When President Obama became, this is not politics, people. Please understand me. When he came into office, he said, you know, space exploration is critical. Technology development and education, though, are the most important things for this nation. We have got to educate our kids. Those are his hallmarks. Technology development, we have got to get back to making things if we're going to compete with the rest of the world. You know, he uses the terms out-educate, out-innovate, and out-build if we're going to beat the rest of the world. He finally gave us approval to announce the next generation of exploration vehicle, which we call we got to get a name, but it's called the SLS, or the Space Launch System. And it is, what does it look like? It looks like Apollo. You know, it looks like a Saturn V, because rockets are rockets. Everybody wants to know, why does it look like a Saturn V? Or why does it look like Ares? It's because, you know, you got a pointy end where the capsule is, where people are. I would love to have a space shuttle sitting up there, but we're talking about coming back from Mars or the moon, where the speed, the velocity of reentry, the pressure on the vehicle, the heat on the vehicle is way more than space shuttle. And technologically, we just don't have a capability of making a winged vehicle that can do that. So we're back to a capsule, unfortunately. But we're going to go, over the next 10 years, we're going to be able to put humans back around the moon, onto an asteroid. The president has told me, I don't know how I'm going to do this, but I mean, it's sort of like Kennedy and his Rice universities. You know, why do we go to the moon? Not because it's easy, but because it's hard. President Obama has told us he wants us to have humans around an asteroid in 2025. That may sound like a long time. That's less than 15 years, and we don't know how to do that. And asteroids are not like planets. They orbit the sun. They're very irregular. Some of them are like rocks. Some of them are like, we don't know, metal. We don't know. So we've got to send out precursors to determine, sort of like Jim and his crew did, looking for a landing site on the moon. We got to find an asteroid that we can, in fact, rendezvous with, and then be around Mars by 2030. For the young midshipmen here, I mean, I trade. You know, some of them are going to go back to the moon. Something I came to the space program to do, to be quite honest. And Challenger set that away. Some of them are going to go to an asteroid. And one of them, maybe, is going to be among the first people to set foot on Mars. Human beings have dreamed about that since time began, and we are going to do that. It's going to be tough, but we're going to get there.
Are we going to be able to afford it?
That's the toughest part. You know, technologically, it's difficult. Economically, it is incredibly challenging, but it's what does the nation want to do? If we had thought about it, we'd have never gone to the moon, financially. If people had known what it was going to cost to go to the moon for the Apollo program, reasonable men would have said, forget it. The other thing that Jim will tell you, we looked at what we call probabilistic risk assessments. You know, what is the risk of doing this? NASA didn't use probabilistic risk assessments in the Apollo era because it said, don't do this. Because people misunderstood what probabilistic risk assessment tell you. They give you, Beamer, you can help me here. They tell you where to put your money. What are the most risky aspects of what you're about to do? They don't say don't do it. They just say, man, if you're going to undertake this, that's really hard. So put your money on trying to fix that. This is going to be hard. If the nation doesn't get behind it, if we continue to be divided the way we are right now, you know, I will have made this announcement this week, and the next administrator will come in trying to figure out what the next program is going to be. I'm an optimist. I'm the eternal optimist. And I can't help but believe that once we work with the American people, our international partners are more than ready. They've been anxious for us to say this, because this is going to be an international venture. We haven't talked about the Chinese. We can't work with the Chinese right now, but I'm rooting for them. They're probably going to put a spacecraft called Xinjiao into orbit here. Hopefully by the end of the year, it's going to be the first capsule of their space station. And the reason they're doing that is because we are not allowing them to be partners right now. So they're going it alone. They need to be successful to drive us. If that's successful next year, they're probably going to fly 2 flights. One will be a flight to dock, prove that they can rendezvous and dock with it, and then the second one will be to put astronauts in their space station. It's important to realize we live in a global environment now. We are not alone. We don't dominate. We don't tell everybody else what to do, because these little nation states that we used to be able to dominate, they're not the people we're worried about. We're worried about individuals and people that rise up. We've got to interface more with other people of the world and get them to understand that our way of life is the best way. You got to engage.
One immediate question, and then we'll try to take a couple of questions because I know we're starting to run over. One immediate question about the space station right now. The fact that there are 6 people up there now, 3 are coming back.
Came back.
Came back.
Safety back.
Okay. 3 others have to leave, I understand, by the 19th of November.
No. Don't worry.
We're okay.
That's what's the report.
They are due to come home next year. And what determines the length of a stay on the International Space Station is the life of the Soyuz spacecraft that we use to take them up and return them. And we generally can leave on orbit for 180 days, 6 months. 200 days is that's kind of, we get nervous if you leave it up there for longer than that, just because it's not certified beyond 200 days. So we made the decision to bring increment 28 back this past week, because in order to leave them until we were comfortable that we could launch another crew on Soyuz would have been outside the 200-day window that we're comfortable with. So we decided, okay, we think the Russians understand the failure that they had with the Progress spacecraft several weeks ago. We're confident that they're going to fix it, and we'll be able to send another crew up. And right now, we've announced the 14th of November as the next launch date for a crewed Soyuz mission to take the next 3 members that will bring us back up to a full complement of 6. So a lot of rumors out there. The space program is pretty solid. Station is very stable. We'll be there, we now know, through 2020. And we've actually begun to certify it through 2028, should we decide to do that. It's the place that we are going to base our exploration of the universe out of. It's the place where we're actually going to begin to construct large space structures so we can send them to deep space, because it's so difficult to get things off this planet because of gravity. So you're going to see space stations take on an incredibly important role as we go into an exploration program.
Thank you. General, we have time for 2 questions. Who would like, because the General just covered about 4 of mine in about 2 minutes, which thank you for doing that. Yes.
Ma'am, gentlemen, that's a quick question. What role do you see private industry play in
Good question. What role do you see private industry playing in future space?
Please help me. Jim can answer this question, because when he helped design the Apollo spacecraft, we didn't build it. NASA didn't build the Apollo spacecraft. We haven't built a big spacecraft, not a human spacecraft ever. We designed them. Rockwell, these guys went out to Downey, California, and argued with the designers and the private sector. Private sector industry, American industry builds spacecraft. The difference between Shuttle and this next generation of craft going to the International Space Station and low Earth orbit is that I'm going to contract with the same people, the Boeings, the Lockheeds, the new people, Blue Origin, SpaceX, to build our spacecraft, and then we're gonna go say, I need the service. I need for you to get a 6-person crew to the International Space Station with me. What we have to decide is, are we going to rent it from them and we operate it, or are we just going to hitch a ride, which we could do, like a taxi. So we haven't made that decision yet, but industry, American industry, is going to continue to build the spacecraft, put humans in orbit. What's going to change is you, the American taxpayer, are not going to have to pay for owning and operating those vehicles. You are going to have to pay for the crews to be trained and for the operation of getting us back and forth, but private industry and their investors are going to do the owning, building, and the standard operating. We are going to build and operate spacecraft that are going to do deep space exploration. But again, that's going to be with our industrial partners, the same people who will be operating craft that go to the Lord orbit.
I don't think I have anything to add other than what a lot of people don't realize is exactly what Charlie has said. It's always been a partnership between government and private industry, and the model changes. That it's a contractual basis now for a request for services versus a request to give us how you would implement our design requirements.
One last question. Yes.
With the economy as it is now, what do you think it would take to inspire the American people for this program? Would it take an external thing like maybe the Chinese landing on this internal group?
What will it take, good question, what will it take to inspire America to get on board with this program given the potential challenge?
Let me try real quick and then everybody else. The American public should be inspired. You need to look at our performance in the classroom and realize where we stand in the world in terms of education, particularly science and engineering and reading. If we're not inspired to do things to make our kids want to become engineers and scientists because we're near the bottom in the world, if that doesn't inspire you, I don't know what can. I hope that I will have some midshipmen here in all 4 classes who will want to follow in our footsteps. Yeah, go into aviation, but you don't have to. You don't have to be an aviator to be an astronaut today. We just finished qualifying the very first group of exploration astronaut candidates Friday. They were certified. All of them came in knowing they would never go into space on a space shuttle, that they were being hired to operate on the International Space Station and prepare us to go beyond. They knew they were coming in to do what I dreamed about doing, going to the moon and going other places. And so they are now certified astronauts. They're no longer astronaut candidates. I want young men and women in America and around the world to look at them now and say, I want to be like them. They took a big risk because, there was no exploration program when we selected them. We were dismantling the Constellation program. America's future in human space flight was in disarray. We didn't have a clue what we were going to do. But in the 2010 Congress, they passed an Appropriations Act, an Authorization Act that said, here's where we want to go. We really do we have to stay in space. And we want to use commercial entities to get to low Earth orbit. We want NASA to go back and get us back to the moon, onto asteroids, onto Mars. And they agree with that with the president. And that's where the nation's heading. So I am trying to tell that story as best I can because I never dreamed of going to space. Never. Until I met Ron McNair, who said, that's the dumbest thing I ever heard. That you would not think about that. I want you all to go out and tell young men and women, we have got to go. America has to remain in the leadership. And in order to do that, we've got to be willing to pay the price tag. It's going to be expensive, yes, but it's far cheaper than not doing it and struggling to follow along with somebody else or hitch a ride.
Well, just a comment that for the last 50 years, the space program has really been a positive program that has inspired young people throughout those last 50 years. And even today, the people who raise their hand about still wanting to get in the space program. And so this was always a positive program. The spirit of education was really one of the important fallouts from our space program. That and, of course, the closeness of other countries. The International Space Station was the final result of that. We're all working together now. And so I think that I'm glad that Charlie made that mentioned the continuation to go on past low Earth orbit, because there's really only one destination, and that's the International Space Station. And the Russians have pretty much a lock on that right now. So.
I think that you asked a great question, and perhaps a very profound question. I think we're in a very interesting period right now. As General Bolden's alluded to, we are divided. But if you look at the history of the space program, I think history very clearly shows what we can do when we are united. What will it take to get us united again? I have to agree with Charlie. It's time to root for the Chinese, because it just may be that we need a swift kick in the pants to realize that if you want to maintain your position of prominence in the world, you know, it's like being a world-class athlete. You got to train, you got to practice, and you got to work hard. We have to continue to work hard to focus on technology development, and the space program is a logical place to do that. So it very may be that when China starts routinely putting their taikonauts up on Boulder Space Station, and they acquire the experience necessary to go to the moon, that will be the thing that focuses us again to recommit to the technology development that we have done in the space program and have the ability to continue to do and do well.
Captain Wendy Lawrence, Major General Charlie Bolden, and Captain Jim Lovell.